Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Kingdom Principles with Reverend Dr. Poke. How are you all doing? I've missed chatting with you. I want to start by apologizing for not posting anything last week. Um, Hopefully, the program will be more regular, at least weekly. So, let's talk about something interesting. Knowing when to leave, knowing when to separate. Now, there's a story in Numbers chapter 14, a very interesting story. Let's give you a bit of a backstory. So, the Israelites had left Egypt and they were wandering in the desert. God was leading them to the promised land. After about a year, they got to the borders and 12 spies were sent out. But the 12 spies came back with a bad report, apart from two of them. And they discouraged the people from taking over the promised land, saying that there were giants there and they wouldn't be able to defeat them. They demoralized the people, and God was very upset because the people refused to trust God and go and take over the promised land. And they started whining and saying they would rather go back to Egypt where they had cucumber and milk and what have you, and would rather, die in the desert than go and be killed in war. So God said, okay, you shall have your wish. None of you will enter the promised land except those two, Caleb and Joshua, who brought a favorable report and who encouraged faith in God. The rest will keep on wandering for 40 years in the desert until all of them die and only their children will get into the promised land. So some time has passed since God said this, and the people were subdued because God definitely punished those who rebelled. But then, as time passed, they forgot again what God had said to them, and new rebels rose up in the camp. Let's talk about Korah. Now, Korah was a Levite. You see, the tribe of Levi were in charge of taking care of God's house, the tabernacle. So the Levites took care of all the articles of the tabernacle, but the priesthood belonged to Aaron, who was also a Levite, and his son. So they took care of the Holy of Holies, the innermost part of the tabernacle. And so Korah rose up and he got some followers um, to stand up against Moses and Aaron and say, but we have been wandering around in this desert. The promised land you said you would take us to, which is flowing with milk and honey, we haven't gotten in. They intentionally forgot what God had said as a punishment, for their sins. And he rose a rebellion and said, who says you're the only leaders? We are all God's people. Have you heard that before? Does God only speak to you? God can speak to me too. He rose a rebellion against Moses and Aaron and brought about 250 leaders behind him. And Moses was very upset. And Moses said, okay, we shall see who is God's servant, who is the Holy One set apart among us. And so he said they should get incense and to offer, and he too will get his. And so God came to answer Moses, and God was very angry, and he said Moses should step aside so that he can destroy the whole community for this rebellion. Moses interceded for the community and said, God, don't destroy the whole community of account of this man's sin. So God said, okay, then tell the community to stay aside, set apart, go away from Korah and his followers so that I can destroy them. So Moses went to the tents of Korah and his followers, and he told the rest of the community to step aside, to separate themselves. Now, those who believed God and believed Moses separated themselves. Korah and his followers stood by their tents, and Moses said, if really I am the Lord's servant and I am supposed to be leading you, then these men will not die a normal death, but something new, something strange. The earth will open itself up and swallow them alive. And as he was barely finishing his statement, the earth opened up and swallowed Korah and his whole family who were with him at his tent, as well as his followers who stayed by him. Now let's think a while. Some people listened to Moses and stepped aside. They were not swallowed up. Some people separated themselves from the rebellion and they were spared. There's a lesson to be learned here. There is a time to associate and there's a time to separate. There's a time to embrace and there's a time to refrain. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 tells us that there's a time for everything. It's important as a child of God to know what God is saying to you and act accordingly. Be blessed. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.